From the beginning of America's independence, America has had its struggles. These times of struggle have been reduced with America's great leaders. Lyndon B. Johnson, the 36th President of the United States, was elected in 1964. LBJ was left to fix America's problems. To help America, LBJ came up with the Great Society. The Great Society was an effort to help America become the best it could be. Controversy arises when the discussion of whether the Great Society's successes or failures outweigh each other. LBJ's Great Society was a successful plan for the short term, and it helped America in the long run because it created programs, acts, and laws that benefited groups. On May 24, 1964, LBJ gave a speech that summarized some of his expectations for the Great Society. Three main things that LBJ made a point to include in his Great Society was the improvisation of America's cities, countrysides, and the classrooms. Although the Great Society did not only include these main changes, it was a start. The first part of the Great Society, given in his speech, specified that the city needed to be improved. LBJ believed that to have a great society, the cities of America needed to fit the number of people it maintained. He also specified that transportation and health needed to be improved within the cities. LBJ's second part of the Great Society made a point that America is a synonym for beautiful, and that the countryside needed to become more of a healthy and beautiful environment. Another part of the Great Society that LBJ specified in his speech is that America's future children's minds need to be open to imagination and education. He said, "Today, 8 million adult Americans, more than the entire population of Michigan, have not finished 5 years of school. Nearly 20 million have not finished 8 years of school. Nearly 54 million, more than 1/4 of all America, have not even finished high school." Before ending his speech, LBJ admitted that these focuses were only the start of changing America. He also said that there were many other changes and improvements that needed to be made, but it was only the start. Although not admitted into his Great Society speech, LBJ made many efforts towards civil rights, especially through his speech, "We Shall Overcome," which addressed Congress on its treatment of African Americans. LBJ specified that through the democratic process, America should fix and guarantee African Americans the right to vote. Although LBJ did not have specific goals and instructions on how to turn America into the Great Society, there were attainable goals that could soon have actions behind them. Prior to the Great Society, society was not a very hospitable place to live. There were many improvements to be made. Racism and poverty was at an all-time high. The United States government began keeping comprehensive records of the poverty line in 1958, and the poverty rate had been declining when the War on Poverty was launched in 1964. It fell from 22.4%. This shows that poverty rates were high before LBJ was elected into presidency. Before LBJ was elected, only 20% of all African Americans could vote due to the poll, taxes, and literacy tests that needed to be taken before any African Americans could vote. The Great Society had many effects. Many of the acts that were signed did not take their effect until years later, while some automatically helped Americans. In the short term, the Great Society lightened the burden on the Americans, which assisted in the reduction of poverty and racism. In the Great Society, acts that were specifically meant for the reduction of poverty were given the official name War on Poverty. All of these acts contributed to the reduction of poverty and the advancing of society. The poverty rate declined further after implementation of the War on Poverty, hitting a low point of 11.1% in 1973. This shows that there was an extreme reduction of poverty due to the acts in the War on Poverty.
All Americans must have the privileges of citizenship, regardless of race. And they are going to have those privileges of citizenship, regardless of race. But I would like to caution you and remind you that to exercise these privileges takes much more than just legal right. It requires a trained mind and a healthy body. It requires a decent home and the chance to find a job. and the opportunity to escape from the clutches of poverty. Of course, people cannot contribute to the nation if they are never taught to read or write. If their bodies are stunted from hunger, if their sickness goes untended, if their life is spent in hopeless poverty, just drawing a welfare check. So we want to open the gates to opportunity. But we're also going to give all our people, black and white, the help that they need to walk through those gates.
Acts that were included in the War on Poverty was the Revenue Act of 1964. This act decreased the marginal income of tax by 20%. Within the first year of the tax cut, the gross national product rose to 10%, and the economic growth averaged a rate of 4.5 from 1961 to 1968. This shows that with the Revenue Act, the economy increased, therefore reducing poverty within America. Another act that reduced the strains put on Americans and an act that attempted to help Americans was the Economic Opportunity Act of 1964. This act was created to eliminate the paradox of poverty on the midst of plentiful in this nation by opening to everyone the opportunity for education and training, the opportunity to work, and the opportunity to live in the decency and dignity. In the short term, the Great Society helped millions of people get out of poverty. This can be shown through the reduction of the poverty line and all the acts that succeeded in their purpose of lightening the burden of Americans. Not only did the Great Society have short-term effects, but it also had many great long-term effects. In the long term, the Great Society helped races become more a part of the U.S. It promoted education in the U.S., and it addressed health needs in the U.S. The Great Society helped races become more a part of the U.S. because it contained many acts that helped African Americans become more equal. For instance, the Civil Rights Act of 1964 was passed under the Great Society. This act forbade discrimination against sex, color, and race. This act helped thousands of people that were previously discriminated against. Although this act did not end racial discrimination, it was the start of a new beginning. The Voting Acts Right of 1965 was also passed. The Voting Acts Right aimed to overcome legal barriers that prevented African Americans from exercising their right to vote. The Voting Rights Act, signed into law by President Lyndon Johnson on August 6, 1965, aimed to overcome legal barriers at the state and local levels that prevented African Americans from exercising their right to vote under the 15th Amendment to the Constitution of the United States. This act significantly widened the franchise and is considered among the most far-reaching pieces of civil rights legislation in the U.S. history. By helping races become more a part of the U.S., the Great Society helped America become the melting pot that it is today.
Mr. Speaker, Mr. President, members of the Congress, I speak tonight for the dignity of man and the destiny of democracy. I urge every member of both parties, Americans of all religions and of all colors, from every section of this country, to join me in that cause. At times, history and fate meet at a single time, in a single place, to shape a turning point in man's unending search for freedom. So it was at Lexington and Concord. So it was a century ago at Appomattox. So it was last week in Selma, Alabama. There, long-suffering men and women peacefully protested the denial of their rights as Americans. Many were brutally assaulted. One good man, a man of God, was killed. There is no cause for pride in what has happened in Selma. There is no cause for self-satisfaction in the long denial of equal rights of millions of Americans. But there is cause for hope and for faith in our democracy in what is happening here tonight. For the cries of pain and the hymns and protests of oppressed people have summoned into convocation all the majesty of this great government, the government of the greatest nation on earth. Our mission is at once the oldest and the most basic of this country: to right wrong, to do justice, to serve man. In our time, we have come to live with the moments of great crisis. Our lives have been marked with debate about great issues: issues of war and peace, issues of prosperity and depression. But rarely in any time does an issue lay bare the secret heart of America itself. Rarely are we met with a challenge not to our growth or abundance or our welfare or our security, but rather to the values and the purposes and the meaning of our beloved nation. The issue of equal rights for American Negroes is such an issue.
The Great Society also promoted education in the U.S. Acts that promoted education and still promote education are the Higher Education Act in 1965, the Elementary and Secondary Schools Act of 1965, and the Educational Opportunity Act of 1968. The Higher Education Act provided student loans and scholarships. The Elementary and Secondary Schools Act of 1965 helped pay for textbooks. The Educational Opportunity Act of 1968 helped the poor finance college educations. By promoting education, the Great Society started the U.S.'s long-term success in education. The Great Society also addressed many health needs in the U.S. Acts such as the Child Health Improvement and Protection Act of 1968, the Medicaid Act of 1968, and Medicare that was established in 1965 all addressed the many needs of Americans at the time. The Child Health Improvement and Protection Act of 1968 provided prenatal and postnatal care. The Medicaid Act of 1968 paid for the medical expenses of the poor. Medicare was established in 1965, extended medical insurance to older Americans under the Social Security system. All of these acts contributed to America ranking 46 in the world for the most efficient health care. To conclude, LBJ's Great Society was a successful plan for the short term, and it helped America in the long run because it created programs, acts, and laws that benefited groups. Acts that were passed during the Great Society helped America become what it is today. America has received high academic achievements. It has become one of the many countries that are efficient in healthcare, and it has become what is known as the melting pot today. LBJ's Great Society has assisted America in what it is today.